There is a line in Savitri. The immortals see not as we vainly see. He looks at hidden aspects and screen powers. Here also we see Sri Aurobindo. When he introduces Savitri to us, he first brings out the inmost truth. Who is she of whom the world has heard? She is the world mother who has cast herself as sacrifice, as a great holocaust in this world of suffering and death to redeem it. This is the story of Savitri. And he starts with telling us about the Divine Mother and how she plunges herself into the night and darkness, and simultaneously the dawn which emerges out of this darkness, bringing hope and light and joy. And from that he leads us to the inner being of Savitri. It is just the other way as we would see. The difference between our vision and the divine vision is essentially this, that we see the large from our smallness, we see the depth from our surfaces, and we see the vast and the height from our lowly station. But the divine, his vision is just the reverse. He sees the frontal aspect from the depth. He sees the smallness from the point of view of that vastness and the height. So here we have Savitri, to all outward appearances, the daughter of King Ashwapati, the princess of Madra, but the world mother incarnating in a human form, the anguish of the gods. That's where we stopped yesterday. A lot of psychology, misguided psychology, believes that the only motive for human action is desire. And if there is no desire, man would cease to act. And a whole lot of yoga and spirituality is built around this, to cease desire and to cease from action. But how do the beings of a higher consciousness act? And here Sri Aurobindo lets us a beautiful secret. Here is Savitri, in whom the fluttering hued illusion of desire is not there, or visits her as a sweet alien note, and yet she acts. So what is the standpoint of her action? In her there was the anguish of the gods. The gods, we are told, incessantly labor. They have no personal desire to fulfill, no home to build. They don't have to bother about the bank balance. They act, and they act powerfully and mightily. They act to bring light, to bring love, to bring hope, to bring joy and peace to war-torn hearts. And they bring all this not for any personal purposes, but out of a deep surrender to the divine will. In one of the beautiful lines, Sri Aurobindo says, a deep surrender was his source of might. That surrender, they act out of that. Here, Savitri, who is the chief actor and hero, if you may like, in the whole play, she has no personal agenda to fulfill. She carries in her the anguish of the gods, imprisoned in our transient human mold, the deathless, conquered by the death of things. This is the paradox that we have come to solve. We who are deathless, we are apparently conquered by the death of things, the form which we inhabit is so fragile, is so temporary, is so weak. It's not able to, we are not able to build immortality with these things. And yet that is the work for which Savitri has come. A vaster nature's joy had once been hers, but long could keep not its gold heavenly hue, or stand upon this brittle earthly base. A narrow movement on time's deep abysm, life's fragile littleness denied the power. It's very interesting. Often people raise this question: how is it that those who are deeply engaged in some kind of inner life, we may use the word yoga, how is it that they fall ill? How is it that the Divine Himself incarnates in a human body and has to go through suffering and pain and illness and experience everything just as we experience? Of course, there are several reasons. One common explanation, of course, is that He takes upon Himself the burden of humanity. What is that burden? We are normally told it's the burden of the karma. But the real burden that humanity bears upon itself is the burden of ignorance. And the moment he tries to bring down something higher and greater into this earthly mold, it breaks. And this is a problem. God wants to create a beautiful world. But the moment it comes down, this body breaks, or the mind breaks down, or different parts of our being, they throw up all kinds of resistances. And the Divine takes upon Himself this great burden. He brings down that greater light and greater consciousness into this earthly frame. And sometimes the frame cracks and breaks. And yet He hopes to implant that greater power in this earthly mold. This is the work. And in one single line, Sri Aurobindo summarizes the whole problem. When someone asks Sri Aurobindo, you must be busy with the supermind. He says, well, I have to also see that the earth is ready, that the fuse does not go off when the power descends. We think it's just as simple as that a higher consciousness comes down and that's the end of it. Where is our body, where is our mind ready for that? When Mother was asked about the supermind, Mother said, my child, you are so small, so small, so small. We all live in a very small sense of the ego, around which a little life, moved by the goad of desire. She says, where is the room for supermind to enter into this? You must be vast, very vast for it to act. One of the preconditions Sri Aurobindo gave for that, for the higher consciousness to act, was that one must enter into the cosmic consciousness, be free from this littleness, and she brings that vastness, that delight. It's very interesting, Sri Aurobindo equates these two, wideness and bliss, oneness and delight. As if in one line he gives the entire secret of delight. The proud and conscious wideness and the bliss she had brought with her into the human form, the calm delight that weds one soul to all. We all want happiness that will never go away. But this is the secret. What prevents us from experiencing delight, which we are told is the very nature, the very stuff, the very base of things, is that our life moves in a very narrow movement. And the narrower we are, The more we are cut off from the all, the more we experience the as if a friction between a little movement of delight and a vaster movement of delight. And in our little being, it's translated as pain and suffering. Essentially, it is meant to liberate us from our narrow bounds. It is an indicator that look, we are actually being very narrow and small. When Mother was asked about the karmic law, what is the effect of karmas, and we are told all kinds of fantastic stories that if you do bad karmas, then you'll be born into a poor family, and if you do good karmas, you'll be born into a rich family. And as we grow up and we look at life, we sometimes wonder whether which is curse and which is a boon when we really look at life. And Mother puts it very beautifully. She says, my child, every act that you do with a sense of wideness, every good action, every unselfish act makes you wide. It's like a fresh air which makes the flower bloom. And every act which is selfish and narrow makes you small. So it's as simple as that. Every act which is an act of wideness brings delight because it's a natural law of being. Wideness is delight, narrowness is suffering and pain. And she weds all through this calm delight. We wonder about problem of human unity, and of course Auroville has been created with that purpose, and this world has been eventually created with that purpose. And we try through mental association, through all kinds of platforms where people of different faiths and customs come together and they exchange ideas and try to understand each other. Sri Aurobindo tells us that is not the way. We can try that, but that is not the way. It is a very artificial means. It's okay, it will make us little wider than our little self, but that is not the real way. What is the real way? The rishis in the Upanishad speak about it. Ekatvam anupashyata. He who sees oneness everywhere. And the sign of that oneness is delight. The more we live by that wideness, that oneness, there is a natural delight. And when there is delight, there are no boundaries, there are no this and that, but one delight which weds all to the all. So that Savitri brings into this earth nature. She is bringing this boon. She says, I have come to give oneness and delight to earth. She is literally bringing this with her because that is part of her inner being. The proud and conscious wideness and the bliss she had brought with her into the human form, the calm delight that weds one soul to all, the key to the flaming doors of ecstasy. And along with that, she brings a key. And she says, there is within the human heart a little door through which you can pass on to that wideness and that delight, and I'll give you that key. All this she brings to us. Now, Sri Aurobindo says, what is our response? Because we have seen there are two ways. The divine looks at our littleness from his vastness. And therefore he is so loving and so forgiving, so full of love and compassion for all of us. But what is our response towards the divine? We throw heaps of doubt, heaps of unfulfilled desires, heaps of our depression and darkness onto him because we are here and he is there. And sometimes people wonder that how does the divine brings around himself all us human specimen? And this is the answer. He can do it because he is divine. Precisely because he is divine, he can do it. A lesser being would not do it. He would always look for the best, elite. But the divine, he can gather around himself everyone. We have this great image of Shiva in the Indian mythology. In Shiva's marriage, All kinds of beings are there, the celestial beings, the musicians of the gods, the great gods, but also the titans, the bhutas, the pishachas, everyone he gathers around and carries because he knows, he is confident that he can handle. A lesser being will say, no, give me some select beings. So she gathers around herself all these beings. Later on in Savitri, there is a description of how the divine relates with the human and how the human relates with the divine. Here Sri Aurobindo is giving it in a very brief summary form. She brings the calm delight, she brings the oneness, she brings the key to the flaming doors of ecstasy. And we don't want that. Earth's grain that needs the sap of pleasure and tears. Rejected the undying rapture's boon. In the hour of, in the God's labor, Sri Aurobindo speaks about it. Only by passion and pleasure and pain his drama can endure. We don't like a story which is beautiful from the beginning till the end. We say we want some spice in it. Spice means there should be some problem, some sorrow, some suffering. If we look inside, we almost love tragedies. The mother speaks about it and she gives a deeper reason because over many, many millenniums, matter has experienced that only by suffering it moves. It has faith in suffering. It cannot believe that it's possible to grow from joy to greater joy. And if we look deep inside, something within us always vibrates with a sense of anxious foreboding. This may happen, that may happen, and this, that may happen is usually negative. Because such is our nature, it needs the sap of pleasure and tears. Rejected the undying rapture's boon, offered to the daughter of infinity her passion flower of love and doom she gave. It says, I too have something to give to you. You are bringing for us ecstasy and delight. I will give you something. There is something which grows on earth. You have come from heaven to bring this boon, and I'll give something to you, O heavenly child. And what does it offer? The passion flower of love and doom. Take this. Experience the love of earth and experience the doom that it gives to men. And she accepts it. In vain now seemed the splendid sacrifice. A prodigal of her rich divinity, herself and all she was, she had lent to men, hoping her greater being to implant, and in their bodies' lives acclimatize, that heaven might native grow on mortal soil. The divine becomes like human, plays human games, talks like us, behaves like us, even moves as if ignorant like us, so that we can feel him close and can approach him without the feeling of someone too great to know. The mother says at one point that, "Oh Lord, I lament my limitations. I have to wear this heavy cloak so that they can perceive me." She speaks about it. And she says, if I were to come in my true form, who would see, who would behold the glory? Probably some would worship her, but none would try to become what she wants us to become. So she shows the way, shows what suffering is. Everything. Sri Aurobindo and the mother speak about it. Sri Aurobindo says passingly in one of the letters when someone asks him, "Oh, you are an avatar, what is your problem?" "You are God. It's all very easy for you." And he says, "My child, I had to bear all the difficulties, and the mother 10 times more than me that any human being can experience. What earth gives and what the divine brings. We cannot imagine a Sri Aurobindo being dragged with a rope tied around the waist, being carried to the jail. He who enters into the jail of human ignorance to liberate humanity, and yet he has to experience that. And he does it. And after the entire 1 year of prison, what he has to say? They put me into the prison. God came and turned it into an ashram. This is divinity. There is no bitterness, but something beautiful even in that. He knows, he has experienced. We don't have to worry that, God, you don't know. I have a special problem. He says, I know the problem and I know your human problem also. But I have a solution to give. Do you want it? And we say, no, that we don't want. We want something else. Hard is it to persuade earth nature's change. Mortality bears ill the eternal's touch. It fears the pure divine intolerance of that assault of ether and of fire. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness, almost with hate repels the light it brings. It trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. Mortality, in the deepest sense, is all that limits us. And the big problem is we want everything, we want the divine, but we want Him in our smallness. There should be a divine, that is very good. Everybody wants a divine. But that should be a divine who must confirm my smallness, even encourage my smallness, even strengthen my smallness. I want a divine who would be like that. But a divine who liberates me from my smallness, who lets me lose all those little reference points that I have around my life, that divine I don't want. That divine is too vast. I want a small divine. And it is true not only of the average humanity, it is true even of the exceptional kind. We have in the Gita one exceptional kind of human being who has lived with the divine from his childhood, even walked with him, spoken to him as a friend. And one day he asks, who are you? You are talking to me these wise words, who are you? He says, oh, you want to see who I am? Can you bear it? He says, maybe, but I would like to see nevertheless. And when he sees, he has some notions of divine. Divine is there, he will tell very sweet words, very saintly appearance. And here is a divine who is, of course, full of beauty and delight. But on the other side, terrible is the form that the Godhead assumes. A form that swallows all the forms into himself. He appears not only as the great liberator, but also as the great destroyer. It's so fascinating because the destroyer is at once the great liberator. We think he is the destroyer. In Savitri, this one thing is so beautifully, we think divine has taken away this from us, that from us. But actually he is liberating us from our smallness. There is a very nice little story of an empress who had a beautiful mirror brought from China in those days, Mughal empress. And one day, one of the attendants, she was bringing that or cleaning that mirror, and it fell down and broke. And she was shocked. She knew what is imminent. Probably a death sentence. Maybe I'll lose my job, that is a minimum. Maybe sent away from the country. And she goes with great fear and anguish in her heart and discloses to the to the empress, "Oh, mighty queen, that beautiful piece from China that is broken," and hangs her head down. The queen, the empress, was a mystic of sort. She would not behave as we would behave. What? My such a precious thing? And then we'll pray to the divine to get us one more. She says, "Oh, wonderfully done. That one thing which every day reminded me of my this little form, that has been snatched away. Thank you so much. Today you have really liberated me from that one bondage which held me back." This is the difference. Mortality bears ill the eternal's touch. Eternal comes to liberate us. And mortality is all that binds us to our smallness. Now, even when we are liberated, we can act with the forms, but not bound by the form. So here it is. Hard is it to persuade earth's nature's change. Mortality bears ill the eternal's touch. It fears the pure divine intolerance. It's afraid of the divine. What will happen if the divine comes into my life? The mother has said, if you turn to the divine and say, "I am yours," don't do this mistake, because he will not leave you. You will forget after that. He will be after you, chase you, till you don't belong to anyone and anything else. We may say in mistake, "Lord, I am yours," because we are habituated. That he will catch. Other things he will not remember. "Oh, you are mine. Okay, let me see." Meera said, "I am yours." So divine said, "Oh, you are mine. Okay, I will see. You are your husband's wife, thrown away. You belong to this kingdom, outcast. You have this identity, gone. Who are you?" "Krishna, I know you, I love you. See, I carry your idol all the time with me." "Oh, this is what you call me. Take it away. This too I'll take away. Now you see me, now you meet me." That is what the divine brings for us. It is such a delight, but we are so much stricken by grief. We feel not his touch. It fears the pure divine intolerance, our smallness, our littleness, of that assault of ether and of fire. Ether is the base on which the world is built. When ether invades our life, it automatically brings oneness, vastness. And when fire assaults us, it purifies us. We want to belong to the divine, and the divine says, "Oh, very good. You want to enroll ourselves in my kingdom?" "Yes, sir." "Very good. Enter." So as we enter, we expect divine's kingdom. Angels will greet us. Nice celestial beings will come. "Lord has granted permission to enter his kingdom. Come." And we will, have celestial music and take you to some royal chamber. But as we enter into his kingdom, they say, "Have you washed your feet? Have you purified yourself?" No. Is there some law like that?" Yes. We want to turn back. "No, nothing doing. You are already enrolled. Go into that fire. Plunge yourself into that." And a long period of purification. And we say, "Lord, I think I am better outside your kingdom. I can worship you from a distance. Don't call me close, too close." To be close to the divine is to feel the pressure of that purifying force. And the greater the pressure, the greater the resistance comes out from human nature. It cannot bear it. The same sun which gives so much warmth when it's cold, the same sun hurts our skin. And as we go close and close to it, that sun which we worshipped, we begin to dread, repel, and we wonder, is it really that? which we loved, which brought life, which brought joy. So such is the nature of humanity. That's why the divine has to veil himself. If he did not veil himself, we won't be able to stand even for a moment. In the story of Ramayana, before Sita is kidnapped, abducted by Ravana, so she says to Rama that we have to start the whole process of our Leela. So what we have to do? She says, I will hide my being in the inner fire, and only a shadow will stand in front. Because if the shadow was not in front, 100,000 Ravanas could not come near her. So the Divine Mother, someone asked her, Mother, why did you come like us? Why didn't you come the way you are? And she had this to say, my child, if I didn't come like you, how could I tell you, become like me? So the divine veils himself in many, many veils. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness. This is another problem. People say, what you are talking of delight? Look outside, world is suffering, everybody is suffering. I must go out and become an activist. Divine says, I have brought delight for them also. They don't want it. The story of Buddha. Buddha goes through a village and people ask him, Sir, there is somebody dead out there. Can you really revive him? I believe you are God. He says, yes, if you believe I can revive him, maybe I can revive him. Oh, please revive him. What do I have to do? He says, bring some mustard from a house where nobody has died. See, divine brings something much greater. But we want something much smaller. That is our problem. And this is the difficulty. It murmurs at its sorrowless happiness. Almost with hate repels the light it brings. It trembles at its naked power of truth and the might and sweetness of its absolute voice. Inflicting on the heights the abysm's law, it sullies with its mire heaven's messengers. It sullies with its mire heaven's messengers. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense. It turns against the Savior hands of grace. It meets the Son of God with death and pain. So we see that, of course, in the light of the great ones. It is not for the first time. We see in the life of Socrates, he comes to liberate the youth and the nation of its smallness of thought. And what is returned to him? Hemlock, poison, death. Sentenced as the corrupter of youth and their morals. We see Christ coming down to liberate humanity from its smallness, narrowness, littleness. And what it gives in return? The cross in payment for the crown they gave. He wants to give crown to the humanity, the crown of freedom, the crown of immortality. And humanity returns the cross. And this is happening throughout. Of course, now it happens in subtle ways. Our own ashram here, we know, was attacked. Not once, but twice. The divine comes to give that. And how humanity responds. It's amazing. This is the human response. And it's not one person or one group or one type of humanity. Within all of us, there is that contradiction to the divine truth, that shadow, that resistance. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense. Oh, we are waves on time's seas. Oh, we are this. We cannot change. This is my nature. We, so many ways we defend our littleness. I cannot change. I am this. Whatever you have to do is your problem. Its thorns of fallen nature are the defense. It turns against the Savior hands of grace. It meets the sons of God with death and pain. A glory of lightnings traversing the earth scene, their sun thoughts fading, darkened by ignorant minds, their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name. It's a brief summary of how humanity responds to the divine touch. A splendid name. We have so many schools and institutions springing up in the names of those great ones. And what happens in those institutions? It just turns into yet another creed. Elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo will tell us how it happens. In fact, in one of the places he says, there is a very old strategy that the adversary adopts. It first tries to oppose the truth by standing against it. When it sees it cannot succeed, truth is too powerful, so it joins the bandwagon of truth to subvert. How? Yet the divine accepts all this because he knows, doesn't matter. He is confident that he can change. But these are the ways by which human resistances take shape. How in our mind that knowledge turns into an ignorance. At one place the mother says, we have faith in Sri Aurobindo, and quite naturally we use the expressions which we think are best according to our understanding, and quite naturally they are the best expression according to how we understand. But we will be mistaken if we believe that they are the only words by which we can understand or express the great truth that Sri Aurobindo brings to earth. And if we do that, we will be beginning to form a religion. We have a mistaken idea. When mother said above religion, so people, sometimes we wonder, oh, then going to Samadhi and bowing down is a religion. Not at all. That is a joy of worship. It is translating into an external act what one feels inside. But it becomes a religion when I say that is the only way to love the mother and only way to worship her. And the next step, if we say, if you don't do it, you don't love her, then we would form a religion. As long as we feel the joy and offer it like that, because it's a natural expression of what I feel inside. It is not religion. It's a joy of bhakti. It becomes a religion when it's turned into a formula. And then it becomes worse than religion, fanaticism, when we think this is the only formula and none else. And with Sri Aurobindo, especially mother has cautioned us. She says, unless one has read all that Sri Aurobindo has written on the subject, you cannot talk about it, because he has approached the same problem from very many standpoints. And sometimes people ask, why did Sri Aurobindo use long sentences? Why couldn't he say very simple short sentences? And there is even a tendency to make short sentences out of Sri Aurobindo. Now the beauty is, why Sri Aurobindo has done, he knows his task very well. We don't have to tell him to use short or long sentences. He has used short sentences where it is necessary in the letters, where there is a personal side. But wherever there is a universal truth which has to be given to man, he has brought out the just right shade of truth, so that you can't twist it and turn it into something other than what is meant. So if we see his sentences, he brings out just the right shade. If you have to bring the complete truth, it becomes almost necessary to use sometimes sentences which are as long as one full paragraph. And if you really read through them, it's such a delight. It's like a painter who has to bring out one single shade of reality. How he will do it? I remember once in a dance program, the great Kathak master, Birju Maharaj, and he was there, and we just wondered what is the greatness about this man. After all, there are so many others who are good and we can't make the difference. He says, as long as everybody is dancing, you can't make the difference. So what is the difference? He says, if he wants, he has got some 70 odd small little those gungru trinklets on his feet. And he has such a wonderful control that he can just make only one of them make a sound. That is the kind of perfection he has achieved. As far as everything is concerned, yes, everybody can make a sound and one can't make a difference. But it comes to the minuteness, here is the master. This is the mark of a master. That Sri Aurobindo brings out that minutest shade so that nothing is left to human imagination. In fact, that is the beauty of Sri Aurobindo, that he has used long sentences so that nothing is left out. And that's why he was so particular. Don't change commas, don't change these things, because he knew human mind will try to play, after all. But when we delve into it, he is safeguarding us. Why? Because in his previous incarnations, he has seen what humanity does. Their sun thoughts fading, darkened by ignorant minds, their work betrayed, their good to evil turned, the cross their payment for the crown they gave. Only they leave behind a splendid name. And that's why Mother has said, with which we can close this first session. She has said, people would try to make a religion out of Sri Aurobindo, but they will not succeed. First he says, if you read through everything that Sri Aurobindo has said, you just cannot make a religion out of it. In his letters itself he says, what I write for X applies to X. And what I write for Y applies to Y. To someone who eats less, sleeps less, I may say eat more, sleep more. To someone else, I may say just the very opposite. How can you build religion on something so vast, so plastic? And they have made sure that there is no possibility of that this time, because they have seen it, that this is what humanity does. Their sun thoughts fading, their work betrayed, darkened by ignorant minds. We'll continue this after the break.